I trust you to take the authority that I'm granting you to make decisions. This is why you're here. A leader's responsibility is not to make every single decision inside the organization. Instead, my goal is to make the decisions that only I can make.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Leading Well podcast series by Blemish. And this is truly just a safe space online where we talk with leaders, for leaders, to have a conversation around workplaces that feel good and work better. My name is Christian Brown, the founder and CEO of Blemish. And today my guest is Shawn Campbell. And Shawn is a retired Air Force One Star General with 30 years of experience, education, and expertise leading organizations and developing teams in high stakes and high demand environments. So I'm excited for this conversation today, and I'm excited to see where it goes. So Shawn, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm really well and very happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I think we'll have a lot to talk about in this what hour or less than an hour that we have together.
Mhm.
And I want to be very intentional about the time that we spend because I want to make sure that we can provide some valuable insights for HR leaders who are looking to build and develop their teams and maybe in high stake and high demand environments. And I think that's kind of been your the brand that you built throughout your career, with the different roles that you've had. So I want to just ask you first to briefly share your journey into HR and the type of environments that you've been able to support so far.
It's a good question to obviously start with. I
Yeah.
did not start in human resources. It was not my first set of roles or responsibilities in the Air Force. So I came to that a little bit later in my career, just some inner workings inside the organization where I was doing things that were adjacent to HR functions. And then we actually just combined those different functions under one umbrella, and HR became the thing that I really started working on and really got into talent management, building those strategies for talent management and looking at how we do things from recruiting, retention, placement, all the way through retirement. Naturally, like any organization, the U.S. Air Force isn't just people who come in, serve for 20 or 30 years and leave. You have people that will come and work for just a handful of years, sometimes a decade or more, and then leave your formation. So we're facing all of the same sorts of things that any organization faces because ultimately, as the word implies, we're working with humans. They populate our organizations. And so I just came to that much later in my career, but it was really the thing I did for the last 6 or 8 years of my Air Force career was largely focused on human resources.
Yeah, I love that. And what was the most exciting part of your experience working with people and then kind of defining what HR means for you?
The number one thing that I enjoyed about that work, and I still do it today, I just do it in the private sector, but
Hmm.
the number one thing is, again, the opportunity to work with people and impact their career journeys. And so for me, and this is sometimes I think misunderstood in organizations, that human resources is not just policies and processes and procedures. We're not just processing the annual performance plan and appraisal and that sort of thing. We're actually affecting how well people are able to perform inside the organization. So for me, that's the thing that's most exciting. How do we move people to become the best version of themselves? And by extension, the organization is going to perform better.
Yeah, 100%. And I can relate to that because that's where my curiosity and passion lies in the performance and ultimately the well-being of the human side of HR, right?
Yes.
And I saw a statistic that said humans spend one third of their lifetime at work. So that's about 90,000 hours over the span of someone's life. So I'm like,
Right.
wow, if a human spends that much time at work, they deserve to have a place where they can feel good, work better and then also have impact. But I know that it's not always sunshine and rainbows, right? I know that it comes with some difficult issues. And so for you, what was one of the most pressing either cultural challenges or well-being challenges that you faced during your time as a HR executive?
There's one word that actually covers both of those camps. It's
What
trust.
is it?
It's trust.
Mm,
And thinking through a couple of examples, a number of years ago, I was leading a 24/7 call center, all HR related questions coming in to the organization. It was at a time in the Air Force in particular where we were undertaking some significant downsizing. So about 10% of the organization was being downsized. And so we naturally had a lot of questions about, oh, am I retirement eligible? I'm not retirement eligible, but I'm being affected by a reduction in force. And so what are my rights and how does that process work? What benefits attend to me for some period of time? An easy one is, for example, how long will I continue to have medical coverage when I'm no longer part of the organization? What does that look like? So we were taking in a lot of calls, and our volume actually doubled. So we would routinely take about 2,500 calls a week, and we were maxing above 5,000 a week, which is a huge uptick with no additional resources. So we didn't have other humans. It just the volume got significantly higher. And when I came to that organization, we're in the midst of undertaking this very significant, very sweeping set of things that were impacting our humans. And the person that I replaced, and this is not an indictment, just different styles in terms of how the organizations are being led. I'm one that really focuses on, I want to develop my people. I'm going to give them the authority to take action, and I'm going to trust that they're going to do the right things. The person I replaced had a different viewpoint of that. And so a lot of the decisions had to be made by that particular person. It took me 3 months to figure out what was actually happening inside the organization because I couldn't get people to take action. So I would, it wasn't that I was just giving direction to people. I said, hey, you own that program area. Just make the decisions that you need to make. Keep me informed. Let me know how I can help if you need that help. And I had a 4-person leadership team and I brought them in and I asked that question. I said, what is it that I'm not doing correctly in the organization? Is it that my instructions aren't clear, that the goals we set aren't right, aren't clear, the objectives aren't clear? What is it that I'm missing? And to a person, trust was the response. People don't trust you yet. They hear what you say, but because your predecessor would not allow them to make those decisions, they don't know that they can trust you, that if they make the decision, that you will back them in making those decisions. So, okay, well, now that I understand that, let's work on building trust with people. I want them to know that I'm not just saying things because you're supposed to say that I trust you as a leader anywhere in an organization. I needed to make sure that the teammates knew I trusted them and that I demonstrated that trust in them. So it took a little while, but once I uncovered that was the issue, then things moved at a much more rapid pace because I understood there were different actions or activities I needed to undertake so that people had confidence that they believed, yes, I can make these decisions and the boss is going to trust me on this and not reverse my decision or ask me questions about why did I decide the way I decided. So that that permeates many other organizations or parts of the organization that I worked in where trust was the key thing. And I have often said this in other forums that organizations operate at the speed of trust. Period. If you don't have trust in people inside the organization, and it goes in all directions, the organization is not going to be nearly as high performing or functioning as it otherwise would be, or frankly should be.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And I see that just in the conversations that I have with other leaders, and
Mhm.
specifically when there's a change in leadership,
Yeah.
right? Because sometimes a leader wants to come in and they just automatically start wanting to run things on the way that they like things to be
Right.
done, right? Without seeing what was already in place, what worked and what didn't before they start to implement change,
Yes.
right?
And so it's interesting. I was having a back and forth with a college professor that I know, and I had the opportunity to do some work with. In fact, he and I did a podcast together a number of years ago.
Nice.
And it was really more. It wasn't necessarily about trust, but he and I had this conversation recently about organizing principles to what you just described as a new leader in an organization. What are your organizing principles? How are you coming
Mhm.
into the organization? Are you being deliberate about what things you're trying to do? Are you communicating those things? I undertook an exercise many years ago now because I like alliterative phrases. I just called it Campbell's Cuts. And it was this kind of concept. It was organizing principles. Here are the things as a leader that matter to me. And it's simple. It's just a one-page sheet. Typically, I did it on a presentation slide, PowerPoint or what have you. And then I would walk through. Here's what these things mean to me as a leader, so that you understand how I view my role inside this organization. And it's a simple way of, as opposed to me coming in with some fully baked strategy for here's how I'm going to operate inside this organization. It's now, these are things that are important to me, and they are applicable to any organization. Now, that doesn't mean that stylistically I'm not going to adapt some things to the organization. And to your really good point that the organization might be operating really, really well, but humans do have a tendency that I want to make my mark. I want people to remember that I was here.
Yeah.
I want to go to that next level. And so rather than come into the organization and generate trust from the beginning, which I thought I was doing when I was at the call center, but I didn't understand that the reception of the way that I was trying to communicate trust didn't break through the to say it plainly, the distrust that people had
Yeah.
because they weren't allowed to operate that way previously. And so that was a really good understanding of I have to take people on a journey. They have to have
Mhm.
the confidence that they can make the decisions, not simply trust that I will give them the authority to make the decisions, but they see in maybe little things that the boss gave me control of these things and he meant it, and he isn't coming back
Mhm.
and asking me why I did the things that I did or what was I thinking when I made a decision. People make poor decisions, but if you want to maintain that trust, even when they make a poor decision, it's a teaching moment. It's not a moment to come in and admonish somebody. That's different if you do something that you know is illegal, unethical, or immoral. Those are very
Right.
different things. Most people come to work wanting to perform well. I mean, I don't think people generally
Right.
wake up in the morning and say, I want to go screw things up today at the office. That's not how people operate.
Right. Right. Yeah, I love that. And I want to dive deeper into that because you said that you had an idea of what you thought it looked like to build trust, but it
Yeah.
was different than what it actually took. So can you kind of walk us through that? What was your original hypothesis, if you would say, about how to build trust, and then what were the actual specific steps or interventions that you had to put in place to build trust?
Yeah, so I mean the prior couple of organizations I had been in before I took that particular role at that call center, I just stated, I trust you to take the authority that I'm granting you to make decisions. This is why you're here. A leader's responsibility is not to make every single decision inside the organization. Instead, my goal is to make the decisions that only I can make. And this is not self-aggrandizing, meaning there are some things that I cannot delegate to you, and nor should I. You know, leaders shouldn't walk in an organization and just say, I'm going to delegate everything that I have in my
Mhm.
responsibility set, and I'll sit in my
Yeah.
office and drink coffee all day. That's not what I meant. So when I came in with the same organizing principles of here are the things that are important to me, it was not enough for me to simply say, here's how I operate, here's how I think, here are the ways I want you to feel comfortable in operating. It was making the connection between when you go into an organization where trust does not exist at a high level. There's, interpersonal trust in different relationships across the organization, but trust in the leadership that what they say they actually mean. And so when I said I had to act differently, it wasn't changing the way I thought about those organizing principles. It was how do I demonstrate them on a regular routine basis so people know that I actually believe what I've said to them. So in some respects, let's say one of the things I often started my charts with, particularly when I was still in the military, was readiness is job one. And
Mhm.
readiness for us and in that context makes sense that, particularly for the men and women who wear the uniform, we may deploy you somewhere. And you need to be ready to do that. And readiness for me meant physically, you need to maintain your fitness. That's a responsibility that we have here. You have to also think about those other, what we refer to as pillars of resiliency, your mental resiliency and your social resiliency and your spiritual resiliency. Spiritual here might mean someone who is a person of a Christian faith or Jewish faith or what have you. It could just mean I'm somebody who is deeply into meditation and self-reflection and that sort of thing. The point was, okay, if I say readiness is job one, but the people on my team don't see me working out. They don't see me
Mhm.
taking time to make sure I'm in a good mental headspace. I'm only always at the office and I don't, leave and go home and eat. All of these little things, I recognize, just using that as an example, people need to see me doing these things. So I
Mhm.
made it a point, say, hey, I am now leaving the office. I'm going to the gym. And if you come by the
Mhm.
gym, because it's there on the military installation, you're going to see me in there. I'm not just saying I'm going to the gym and going home. I'm actually going to the gym to work out. And it's
Mhm.
okay for you to do that too during the duty day.
Mhm.
You don't have to necessarily do it before or after you come in to your duty site for the day. And so it was just simple things like that where I recognize people need to see me living out what I've
Mhm.
said, and it
Wow.
starts to generate that trust. Also, things where I would say my one of the things that I want to do is catch people doing things well. And it goes back to Dr. Kenneth Blanchard and the one-minute manager from, I think it was early 90s when he published that, it may have been a little bit before that. But that was one of his principles was catch people doing things right, as opposed to only
Mhm.
looking for when people are making mistakes. And so I was purposeful, as most leaders are, in just getting out and visiting with people, walking by their desks, and not to be, obstructive of the things they're supposed to do. But when I say I'm going to be out and about trying to catch you doing things right, and then highlighting that, I need to do that. And that is part of my leadership composition, but that mattered particularly in those early days where I said, it was 3 months into the job before I realized that trust was actually
Right.
lacking. Well, now that meant that it wasn't just one time a day I should walk what I called the floor. I probably need to do that a couple of times a day, but do so in a way that people recognized I wasn't looking over their shoulder to make sure they were working. I was
Mhm.
finding those moments just to walk by and, oh, I can hear this person talking with a customer, and they handled this one really, really well, and just taking note of that. So it was that sort of thing. And then people started to see that I was in fact living out those organizing principles that I'd share with them, or as I said, Campbell's cuts. And then now they're starting to generate more trust. It's sort of like taking the chinks out of the armor so that eventually you take off the armor and you feel like I can be vulnerable because the leader is living out what they say they believe in. Now you're starting to have more and more trust. And I mentioned earlier is if somebody makes an error, make it a moment to teach them as opposed to admonish them. And that also generates trust because what it's not, why did you do that thing? It's okay, what can we learn from this? And that personalization of we means I'm a party to this. It's not just what can you do differently next time? It's how can we think differently about the next time this scenario arises? And now
Wow.
it's us working on this together.
Yeah. Wow. So much value there. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so many interesting points. I love that you created your like your own philosophy or strategy with the Campbell's cuts.
Yeah,
That's super cool. And then I liked when you said that you started leading purposefully, right? And I think that goes hand in hand with the readiness or willingness, right, to
mhm,
perform is having it be led by purpose.
that's right.
All right, so that was really good. And so I'm curious about the effect that this had on your team, right? Because I'm sure that being having the increase in calls, the work having the workload double created maybe some stress that was probably visibly noticeable, right? Like what was that like for you? And then what was the result? What shifted as a result of the changes that you just spoke about in terms of like leading purposely and leading by example?
Actually, it's wonderful that you highlighted that. I had
Yeah.
recently shared this story of understanding organizational gas gauges, right? Like understanding
Mm,
how well people are performing. And humans are amazing. We have the capacity to do just about anything. But that doesn't mean we want to be able to, or we should do it at a particular rate or level continuously. And so, with the doubling volume of the calls and chats and the other mechanisms we have for communicating with people, because there was more trust inside the organization, the formal and informal leaders inside the organization were more comfortable opening up with what they were actually experiencing. So when you're just focused on, okay, we want to make sure that we get through all of these calls. We have like every organization, we have specific metrics about how long it takes for somebody to actually get to a live person as opposed to how long am I in the queue just waiting to connect with someone, those kinds of things. So we can manage the metrics and I could say, our responsibility is to get to a call within a certain number of minutes. We're only getting there at, this is a notional number, a rate of 60% of the time. We really want to be at 80% of the time. Well, if I'm just beating people, sort of into conformity to do that,
mhm,
what I'm not doing is generating commitment. They'll be
mm,
compliant. But what I want to get to, and it was one of my cuts, is it's commitment plus compliance equals success. But commitment is
mm,
first. I want people to commit to things and know that they have a voice here, not just be compliant with whatever our metrics say we're supposed to meet or whatever policies we're supposed to effectuate. And so, really, what I got down to is people were sharing with me what was actually happening. And over and again, I was hearing, we are exhausted. We
mm,
just need a breather. And it occurred to me that, okay, there's a way for us to do this. And it's not just let's give everybody some additional time off because the volume isn't going away. And so I
right.
can't just say, okay, there's 189 people in that part of the organization. And so I couldn't
Mhm,
just say, 10% of you take an extra day off this week because that's not going to work because that's
mhm,
going to make it actually worse for the people who are still there because now they're going to have to work at a higher speed if we're going to
mhm,
meet the measures and take care of our customers. And so I was talking with my leadership team and I said, now how do we do this? And we had a spillover location that was not operating 24/7.
mm,
So I contacted the business unit leader there and I just asked the question. I said, hey, is it possible for you to take on all of our volume for a few hours? I don't remember if we did it on like a Wednesday or Thursday, but and the answer is yeah, I think we can handle that volume for you. Why? And I said, well, because the team here is just absolutely overwhelmed, they're exhausted, and I want to take a few hours off on an afternoon, and we're just going to have well, I call it an ice cream social. I'm going to go buy ice cream and all the fixings, and we're gonna set this up, and we're gonna, people want to play games, we can play games. People just want to sit and talk and communicate and spend time together. We're going to do that, but we're going to get off the headsets, and we're just going to take a breather. So I pitched that to not just my leadership team, but to some of the other downline folks, and like that would be awesome. Now you don't have to eat ice cream. Some people don't like ice cream. I don't know why, but
right.
that's fine. It was not about the ice cream, right? It was just about, hey, I know that you want to be able to take a breather for a few hours, and we're just going to do that. So we unplugged, and people loved it. But it got back to that idea of readiness is job one. I want us to be, present and ready to do the things that are before us. So just taking a breather like that, wow, it had such a huge effect. I wouldn't say it lasted for months and months and months. That would not be true, but it had such an effect that one, there was now enough trust in the organization that people told me they were exhausted, and it wouldn't just be the response, well, hey, life is hard. Sometimes the job is too, suck it up and move forward. That's a terrible way to respond to people. So they trusted me to know that if they shared that with me, they were going to get a more compassionate response, more empathetic response than one of, well, that's just what we're here to do. Do your job, which would have been easy for me to say because I wasn't on a headset all day,
Right.
right? But that part of the team
Yeah.
was, and so they had enough trust to tell me about it. So it was, we can do something probably very quickly. I don't remember the number of days, but it wasn't weeks before we actually did this.
Mm,
We found a creative way to give people and I don't mean this to be funny, but just to give them headspace, right? Just unplug and be able to go, I don't have to think about this for the next 3 hours. We're just going to have a good time here in the office, and not like a potluck where you go into the conference room and you scoop food on your plate, and maybe you can commiserate with one another for 20 minutes and you have to go back to work, or you have to do that in shifts. We're all just going to unplug, every single human in here,
mm,
and the
mm,
leaders aren't going to sit in our offices either. We're going to come out and be a part of this. We're going to participate in this. And some people did play games together, and other people just sat and ate ice cream and chatted. And the only rule was everybody had to be there. So it wasn't like I can unplug and
wow.
leave for 3 hours, right? That was
Right.
not. The point was to spend that time together as a team.
Yeah.
Uh, and so that was just a minor thing, but it was so effective on taking that gas gauge and trying to get it back to full when they've been running on or near empty for weeks and weeks and weeks at that point. And the other thing
Mm,
that did was it had a compounding effect in the trust because people understood that I was going to be appropriately responsive to the situations that they were facing. I couldn't resolve
mm,
the high volume for them because I didn't have the opportunity to get more, full-time equivalents and that sort of thing to offset for a period. But they knew that I was paying attention to how well their resilience was being impacted by the work. And then we were looking for ways, creative ways, to help
yeah.
maintain not just the operation, but maintain the humans that were running the operation. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was a really powerful lesson for me too. Sorry, I think I froze for a second there.
Yeah, it's okay. I got you. It was a powerful lesson for you too. Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I froze for a second there.
Okay. Now you're good. You're good.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, but no, but yeah, thank you for sharing that though. That's really cool, and you're really speaking my language with that specifically, right? Because with Blemish, we offer these AI art therapy workshops that are
Yeah.
a creative way for psychological safety, right? We
Mhm.
bring in our psychologists, they organize these workshops, and it's really for the purpose that you just described, which is giving the team kind of a break, a safe space to not have to be so focused on work, but to take a step back to be able to share and build that trust with with leadership, but also with their coworkers. So I love that you highlighted the value of that, from your experience.
Mhm.
And now I'm curious about the like how did you know that it was working? What were there any metrics or feedbacks that you saw that kind of gave you the foresight, like, okay, this worked. This is we improved.
It's there what I wouldn't say that there was an objective measurement that I
Okay.
could point to. I mean, obviously, we still had the operational metrics we were looking at, and I mean, we were a high performing team, so I wouldn't suggest that all of a sudden I saw maybe a 5% improvement in um, you know speed at which we were answering calls or volume that we were able to handle in a day, that sort of thing. Those are going to be ups and downs, puts and takes, just depending on the day, right? Sometimes the human
Yeah.
resource question is more complex than others. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's a simple statement, sentence, and I've answered the question or resolved the problem. Other things are going to take longer. But what I noticed, and you know this when you're working on teams and you get a feel. And
Mm.
I realize this is subjective for the audience, but the
Yeah.
feel was different. And I think people know that. When you're in an organization that's highly stressed, trust does not exist, I'm basically coming in, punching in, doing my job and leaving, as opposed to I have a desire to be here. I feel connected. I feel supported. I feel like this is a good environment. It doesn't mean the volume is abating, but I know that these and so that's what I sensed was people were in a much better place. And then when you're walking, when I'm out doing my walks to find people doing things well, the responsiveness is different. People are like, oh,
Mm.
is he just walking by and looking over my shoulder again, as opposed to people were engaging me, right? And turning it,
Wow.
hey, I have 30 seconds. And also this idea of more positive inquiry, where you'd say, hey, are you having a good day? Yes, no. Oh, it's sort of a binary thing. But when you can have a more thoughtful approach to it, to say, what's been the best part of your day? And so now you're
Mm.
engaging in a different conversation. And I felt like those kinds of conversations were being had more often, not just with me, but with the members of our team. I just had the sense that the team was operating better, they were more connected. And as you said, and this is part of what you and the organization do is, man, I wouldn't have known to call it psychological safety in 2013 because it really
Yeah.
hadn't been as prevalent. Dr. Edmondson hadn't published her book on the fearless organization yet. That's years later. And so that's what I basically saw is we had created, you think about those four levels of psychological safety, we had created a move to the next level. I can look
Mm.
back reflexively in reflection now, a dozen years later, and know that's actually what happened, is that we
Yeah.
were
Absolutely.
evolving and getting better at the psychological safety inside the organization, even if I didn't know to term it that at that time. I just knew that people had more trust in the organization. People felt more comfortable communicating with one another. The team connections were deeper. And I don't, want to paint this picture that everything was amazing and it was perfect, that no organization is. But I could just sense people felt better. There's a higher sense of commitment, as I mentioned earlier. The people were committed to what we were doing, even though it wasn't easy. But we also knew that this wasn't going to be the new norm, meaning we weren't going to stay at that elevated volume in perpetuity. There was going to be a terminating period there, and we would return back down to the more normalized day-to-day operation. But in this time of surge, people knew that leaders actually valued them. And so that commitment was higher. And again, it's a long-winded way to say I just sensed a difference
Yeah.
in yeah.
Yeah, and the term that we use is the morale, the team morale, the morale
Mhm.
of the team. It's like it's hard to kind of quantify it, but it's something that you feel, right? Just like if you were to feel if a team was just not happy, at work.
Yes,
They could be performing fine, hitting the numbers, but if it doesn't feel like they're happy, then they're not, right? They could be behind your back looking for their next looking for their next opportunity, right? So I think it's important
that's
for leaders to be I would say like sensitive to that feeling, right? Would you
that's
say?
as you said that, it reminded me that fast forward about a half a dozen years later, I'm now at another organization. I'm leading this 3,000 person organization at the United States Air Force Academy. Amazing place
Mm.
to work. And inside one of my business units, um, what you just described, I could sense that when I walked into the building, the heaviness. And
Mm.
as it turned out, the leader of that particular business unit was frankly toxic. Had
Mm.
not intended to be. I don't think that that person intended, like I said earlier, to come in and I want to be a toxic leader.
Mm.
They had been in that position a long period of time, and I think they had atrophied a little bit in this sensitization to the people around them and leading in a different way as opposed to the way that human evolved into leadership. So this we knew that there was something not right inside that organization. So like any organization, we had mechanisms for evaluating what was actually happening and determining how to restore and repair the organization. So ultimately, we had to remove that leader from their
Mhm.
position, put somebody else in there. But to what you've described about just feeling it,
Feeling it. Yeah.
I- a couple of days after that human was no longer in that leadership position, I walked into that organization. It just felt different. It was
Wow.
it was really illuminating, but demonstrates that going back to that first word, the trust was not inside that organization,
Mm.
in that leader.
Yeah.
And in the other direction, that leader did not trust the
Wow.
men and women on the team. And
Mm.
I learned through that process, one of the things this leader said to his leadership team inside the organization, when I said, I want you have the authority to make decisions and do these things. I said that in my first meeting with the entire organization, that you all have my authority to act. I owe it to you to make sure you're properly developed to make the best kinds of decisions, but you don't have to ask for my permission to do virtually anything except for those handful of things, again, that I can't delegate to you.
Yeah.
And so as I went through my Campbell's cuts with that organization, I said that. Well, I learned months later when we evaluated what was happening inside this particular business union, that leader went back to the team and said, I know we all just heard, you know, Shawn Campbell say that. That's not how we're going to operate here. The decisions still are mine. So you can see
Wow.
that that person was not trusting people inside the organization. Now, irrespective of the
Mm.
fact that he didn't actually have the authority to do that, because the authority under which he was operating was mine, not his. It's a little different, obviously, in the military construct.
Mm. I see.
That authority is not his to hold if I say give it further, further delegate that. So
Mm.
that's another issue where that leader was breaking faith with me and not following the
Mhm.
things I had instructed that person to do. But yeah, you could absolutely feel it inside that
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. But we're humans.
Yes.
We're emotive. We're all
We're
emotive.
feeling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that goes back to what you mentioned earlier about how, like, as humans, we're amazing. We have amazing attributes, right? And one of those is
Mhm.
the ability to feel. And I want to make sure I speak on this. You mentioned it a couple minutes ago when you were talking about how the lasting effect of the creating the spaces our team socials, it didn't last forever, right? But it improved a little bit. And it reminded me of James Clear's book Atomic Habits. And he says if you
Yeah.
get 1% better each day for 1 year, you'll end up 37 times better by the time you're done. Right. And I
Yeah.
think that could be a way that we kind of look at strategies for well-being in the workplace. It's like it may not have a huge impact right away, but if we're able to make small improvements every day for a year, 6 months, whatever, over time, we'll be that much more, right, able to sustain these things that we're implementing.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, that Atomic Habits is a really good book. It's on the shelf behind me.
Yes.
And there's another book I read, which is what I call an easy reader. Not that
Okay.
Clear's book is not easy to read. I mean, he's eminently readable and applicable, which is mark of a great book. Patrick Lencioni writes that way. John C. Maxwell writes that way. Things that you give
Mhm.
really good principles and then good examples of the practice. But I read another book a number of years ago, and I think it's called 212 Degrees. If I remember my science correctly, at 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius, water boils. And
Mhm.
the whole premise of the book is very similar to what you just described, where Clear talked about if you get 1% better a day. The whole point was that at 211 degrees uh, Fahrenheit or at 99 degrees Celsius, water's really, really hot, but it hasn't changed property yet. There's no, there, you know,
Mhm.
it hasn't reached the boiling point where it now starts to off gas. And so the properties have changed. And the point of that whole book is it's just 1 degree difference between
Mm.
not
Wow.
boiling and boiling. And it's just a very small, obviously degree, no pun intended, but the difference that you can have in that respect is really powerful. And it's for me, I'm a visual learner. It was a good visualization of if I just do a little bit more, it could make a huge difference. So it doesn't have to be, I think sometimes leaders, whether you're HR or leader of any sort or stripe, have the sense that, well, I have to just ramp up by huge amounts
Mhm.
to get to that next level. Most often that's not actually true. And is it something that's attainable? Right? If you're trying to move, let's use a different metaphor, if you're trying to move a car from 0 to 60 miles per hour or 0 to 85 kilometers per hour, well, there's inertia that has to be overcome.
Mhm.
And just stomping on the gas harder isn't necessarily going to make it move at a higher rate of speed because the engine still has to function the way the engine functions. Now, it's not a perfect metaphor, but it's the same kind of thing. If I just give it a little more gas once I'm at a specific speed, I can pick up. But it's the same thing. I'm not going to leap, 20, 30
Right.
miles or kilometers per hour just by simply stomping on the gas because the
Mm.
throughput is still the throughput. Now, how
Mm.
much fuel
Yeah.
can get into the engine and combust if it's,
Yeah.
normal combustion engine, not an EV?
Yeah.
Different operating principles, but it's a same kind of concepts. A
Yeah.
little bit more
Absolutely.
will actually get you where you want to go. And so the last thing, and then I'll just pause, is it's also about having patience as a leader.
Mm.
Have a little bit of patience and recognize that not everybody can move at the same pace. That doesn't mean they're not making progress. They're just not moving at the same pace. So patience is really important. And it all connects back to if I'm impatient, people are not going to trust me.
Yeah. It always comes back to trust. I love
Yes.
that. Oh,
Yes.
always comes back to yeah. I love that. So you like we have a couple minutes left here, so I want to make sure I ask you these last two questions.
Okay.
And bringing it back to the story of solving the challenge at the call center. Now, being where you are today and looking back, um, what would you do anything differently? Um, and if so, of course, what would that be? And then the second question after that would be is, what principles from that experience are you
Mhm.
still using today to guide your work?
Both really good questions. I'd love to tell you that I would have done a whole sweeping thing, sweeping number of things differently. It's easier to obviously look back, and the thing I would have done differently for sure is not waited to ask that question for 3 months.
Mm,
And this is something that I learned and in an application across the spectrum through to the work that I'm doing now is I would have asked more questions earlier. And it's an interesting concept. As I moved at that point, I was just about to become what we call a full bird colonel, and so I was moving into the senior ranks inside the Department of Defense. And obviously later I would promote and move into the executive, senior executive ranks. But what that taught me is as I had more positional authority and responsibility, I needed to be asking more questions, not fewer.
mm, wow.
And so that really stuck with me and still to this day is to be very inquisitive. It's not to over inundate people with questions, and it's not just simply being intellectually curious. It's I need to ask more questions so that I know what I don't know. And that's really what I would have done is ask that question earlier and ask more questions about what was happening inside the organization. And not just making the assumption that because I stated, my organizing principles, my Campbell's cuts, that people get me. Well, people probably didn't get me. And so that application in every position following was something I paid more attention to, the connection between the words on the screen that they're reading and why that's important to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Awesome. Awesome. Well, that was great. This has been a really fun and valuable, I would say, conversation. So I appreciate your time. And last, like I said, this was the last question, but this is really the last question. We're gonna end with this. And like I said at the beginning, the goal of this is really to have conversations that with leaders like yourself, but also for leaders around the topic of creating workplaces that feel good and work great. All
Mhm.
right. And so, as we end here, what advice would you give to another, let's say, HR executive or just a leader
Mhm.
who is trying to create lasting change in their organization or solve issues, people issues? What advice would you give a leader?
Ooh, this would take, this is hours of discussion maybe. There are a couple of
Well,
things that I think are really important. So are we back? Sorry, I think I lost you again.
let's give it a second. All right, I think we're back now.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, good.
Okay, good. Yep, sorry about that. We've been having
Works.
weather patterns here, and I think it's been impacting my internet stability.
Works.
There's a couple of things that I think are really important, and it doesn't matter where you are in an organization. If you're a frontline leader all the way through, being the chief executive, is number one, be authentic. Be who you are. We adapt and adopt different ways of. Did I lose you again?
Yeah, for a second, but I got you back now. All right, then. Uh-oh. You there? Okay, you're
Okay.
back. You're back. Yeah, you're back now. You said let's start over with being authentic.
Yeah. So be authentic. Be who you are. Don't try to become somebody you're not, because that'll bleed through, and that will break trust with people if you're trying to fake it. So just be authentically who you are. There's going to be some adaptation and adopting that you need to do some things differently, depending on what the organization needs, but that doesn't mean you change. I mean, some of the ways that you act upon things that need to be done will be necessarily different. So authenticity is really important, especially to go back to building that trust. So people, believe that you're not just a facade or you have a mask on. You are who you say you are. Second is connected to the last couple of questions. Be really inquisitive. Ask questions, get engaged, get involved, connect with people. That's very, very important. And then probably for me, the last thing is be vulnerable, and not this idea of I have to give you too much information about me, that there's oversharing for sure, but be a human. My wife would often say, you're very wooden. It doesn't,
Wow.
you are who you are, but so, give people a little bit of yourself so that they know you're a human being too. And so that vulnerability is super important. And we know, the behavioral science talks a lot about that, and that does build that authenticity, helps build that trust. So just have a little bit of vulnerability with people. Let them know you're human too.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great way to end it. Vulnerability builds trust. One of the things that I say very often. Vulnerability builds trust. That's awesome. And thank you, Sean, again for your time. And thank you everyone online for choosing to click this video, whether you're watching the whole thing or just watching a clip from it. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope you're able to take some value away from it. And I'll see you on the next episode of Leading Well podcast series.